Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing all the buffs and nerfs that were just released today, and we're going to break down some theory crafting essentially and how the meta may shift. Because some of it, I'm not quite sure if it'll change it enough, but that's kind of what we're going to debate here and talk about. The most interesting one that we'll start off with is Ash moving over to the skirmisher class, which means that her level 1 perks have adjusted, which is interesting. You'll notice that the enemy death boxes are now visible on your map, kind of giving that recon back and then baking in this into her kit. Kind of feels like it's just a buff, like here you get to have both perks. At the same time, at least, and you'll notice this, we'll discuss this with Revenant going assault, at least they don't have, you know, the surge, increasing sprint and reload speeds, you know, extra ammo, you know, stowaway reload. So there is that balance change where Ash might lose a little bit of aggression, but it's like a give and take. So I don't know if they consider this a buff or nerf, I guess depending on your playstyle for Ash. But that does slow down a little bit of it, and that some of that synergy with Ballistic, where the ult might be a little bit more required, which there are some buffs and nerfs to that as well. So like we had said, the ultimate as well has been reduced from 100 meters to 75. So a little bit of a nerf, you know, just to the overall distance. You can see the outer edge and how far it goes. The distance is helpful, but again, with the change to skirmisher, you know, I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how this plays out. I think when we start discussing some of the other buffs and nerfs, it might make a little more sense. But since we already talked about Revenant is moving over to the assault class, which I find pretty interesting. Also, the pounce velocity increased from 700 to 800. The max velocity increased from 1,150 to 1,400, and they improved ground detection so guns come up faster. So let's see what that looks like. You know, I would say it's kind of a, oh wow, okay, well, it's definitely, yeah, it's definitely a pretty good buff. And then having Revenant be a little bit more aggressive in terms of reloads going under the assault class, it's a little interesting. I just don't know how impactful that's going to be, but it could, because there could be more synergy with that reload speed. And especially with his ultimate, he comes across like a mini raid boss. But unfortunately, yeah, you do lose that skirmisher buff, you know, perk. So, like I said, there's some gives and takes here. I don't know if you would call this a buff and nerf, is kind of sharing them. Let's go over to Ballistic next. Now, I have a lot of issues when it comes to Ballistic, and this is going to be one of them that I have, is the sling weapon, especially when you put devotion. I think the devs are overlooking the biggest issue is the synergy within the devotion and the sling weapon, leveling it up. I think that's probably the biggest problem that I have, because the devotion is supposed to take a lot of time to level up, but essentially Ballistic can always get there. But nonetheless, comment down below what you think is the biggest issue when it comes to Ballistic. Now, Tempest, the ultimate, no longer gives speed boost to allies. Ballistic still has overall a speed boost for himself. Also, his base tactical charge is reduced from 2 to just 1, so he doesn't have 2 at the start, which means when he gets this perk of essentially double the number of Whistler charges, he's only going to get 2 in a fight. Now, this is helpful because one of the biggest issues as well when it comes to the devotion, which is why I mentioned it earlier, is that synergy of stopping opponents from being able to shoot. And with the devotion, with the ramp up time and just being able to blast everyone down, and that reload speed that you have, especially as an assault class, and giving it to everyone, really, really powerful. But at least now, you have to be a little more selective. With having 4 before, you could lock down a whole squad. Now, essentially, you can only lock down 2, and then early on, at least you're not locking down 2 out of the 3. So there is that benefit. Now, essentially, what's interesting with Alter as well, what they did with the perks. So the perks that you had with Vantage, Control of Worlds, Access Ring Consoles, Gain Zone Overcharge. And then, of course, you can choose the Recon. This makes it interesting because at early game, I guess if you play Zone, then Alter has a little bit more, hey, I have more shields. There's that benefit, like, hey, look, I have more shields. The interesting part about removing this is with the class stacking of Alter, Ash, and of course Ballistic, is that these 2 under Assault before was getting the power of reloads and just constantly having uptime in the fight. Now you're overlapping in skirmisher perks, which is kind of a downside, and Alter can't be the support for the team with fast reses. So losing that res and that Moby, if you run these 3 together, you're going to be missing out on the reset potential. So removing that from Alter does make sense. Also, as well, the increased time for knocked allies to use portal is increased by 1 second. We already talked about the fact that they changed the perk. They increased chase portal open duration from 8 seconds to 10 seconds, so you get a little more time to chase. They also decreased the warning time from 3.5 to 2.5 seconds. So a few changes across the board here. I think, like I'd mentioned, the biggest thing is that they're trying to get rid of the synergy between these three legends and hand it over to, hey, running somebody else. And now having support with this group is pretty solid. We'll see how that works. I think it's a healthy change. Whether or not it'll break up this crew is up for debate, but I think it's a step in the right direction. Now, another change as well is Vantage laser duration went from 15 seconds to 10 seconds. So the bottom right, you'll see that it says scope laser active. That has now been changed to 10 seconds instead. As well, I don't think a lot of people were picking the sniper cover, and so they buffed that. They went from 40 HP up to 75, and they also gave it a different color. Let's see if we can see what color it is. It's like a gold color. Let me see if I can look at that in third person. All right, let's see it. Third person. No. Oh, yeah, you can kind of see it there in the bottom right. But yeah, there's that little change. Looks gold. Bit of an adjustment there as well. Now, the last change, and we've been talking a lot about this with Wattson in terms of perks, is that they made sure the knot gives 50% ult charge instead of 30%. I always said going left was ideal, and the reason why is because most people tend to run a Ash and Ballistic, and so just the same thing like you're makeshifting with Alter, it makes sense to try to put Wattson into that same boat with Help is Here, because somebody, you know, has to essentially do the Moby. But I do find it really interesting that Ultimate Conductor can make a more aggressive Wattson to essentially push and not have to be secondary all the time. And of course, Energized Healer can have some good synergy here. It just depends on comp. That's a big discussion where it depends on composition. What role are you trying to fill for the squad, and what are you trying to solve? And of course, like I said, with meta, if you're running this, then it kind of makes sense where your teammates are assuming you're going to go with this perk. They're kind of forcing you to do that. And that's been a big conversation. I hope this kind of changes the idea behind having to essentially force run those perks and have a bigger option to run. We'll see. We'll see how this all shakes up. Hopefully you enjoyed this quick update. I think that this is an important update because it's trying to change up the meta. And I hope that we just don't constantly see Ash, Ballistic, and Alter together. I think you're still going to see Ash, which is an extremely high pick rate. Moving her here is not necessarily a nerf per se. I still think that she's one of the best entries in the game that we've ever had in Apex Legends history. I think perhaps running Ballistic may not be as mandatory, especially when locking down an opponent, but still extremely strong. We'll see if that deters people with the Whistler reduction, but we're just going to find out. Comment what you think. I still think the devotion's a major problem. We'll see how this shakes up in ranked, and I'm curious to see what happens. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully this is helpful, and see you guys all in the next one. Bye, everybody.